The building was called BOS 5. Not the Salem Fulfillment Center or the Colonial Road Warehouse or anything that would connect it to the town it occupied. Just BOS 5, fifth facility tethered to the Boston Metro Airport Code. Same naming convention Amazon used everywhere. The building didn't belong to Salem. It barely belonged to the street it sat on. It was a name in a logistics network, a coordinate in a supply chain, and the fact that it was 17 miles north of Boston, or 3 miles east of Route 128 or 200 yards from a salt marsh that smelled like low tide in August. None of that mattered to the system. The system only knew BOS 5. I started working security there in October. Securitas held the contract. I'd been with them for about 14 months at that point, mostly doing overnight posts at office parks in Peabody and one short rotation at a biotech campus in Danvers that let me go after the project wrapped. The Amazon assignment came through my branch supervisor, a woman named Dina, who described it as structured, consistent, long-term. She said the overnight was the easiest shift because the warehouse ran a reduced sort between midnight and 4, skeleton crew, mostly automated. She said the building had good climate control and the break room had a Keurig. She was right about the Keurig. BOS 5 was 148,000 square feet of converted industrial space. It had been a chemical manufacturing facility before Amazon leased it, and the bones of that earlier life were still visible if you looked. Poured concrete floors that didn't quite match between sections, a loading dock on the east side that had been widened unevenly, a faint chemical smell in the south stairwell that no amount of ventilation had fully erased. Amazon had retrofitted it into a delivery station, which meant it was smaller than the massive robotics fulfillment centers, but still enormous by any normal standard. 2 main levels. The ground floor handled inbound and outbound. Trucks backed into the dock bays. Pallets got broken down, packages sorted into delivery routes, and staged for the morning drivers. The second floor was mostly staging overflow, some office space, the break room, a training room with folding tables, and a mounted television that played safety videos on a loop. My job was simple: badge production and visitor management during shift changes, monitoring the camera feeds from the security desk near the main entrance, hourly patrols of the interior and exterior logged through a checkpoint system, a handheld device that I tapped against small NFC tags mounted at 14 points throughout the building, responding to door alarms, which happened constantly because associates pushed emergency exits without badging first, writing daily activity reports, coordinating with the loss prevention specialist on shift, though during overnight that was usually nobody, just a name I could radio if something came up. The LP office was on the second floor near the training room, and after 10 at night it was always dark and locked. The building had a badge access system, a camera system with 64 feeds tiled across 3 monitors, an alarm system that tracked every access-controlled door, and a fire panel in the main electrical room. Everything fed into a central monitoring interface at my desk, a software platform that Securitas called SAID, Security Automation and Intelligence Dashboard, though the Amazon LP team called it something different in their own reporting chain. The point is, everything was tracked. Every badge swipe, every door state change, every camera feed, every motion sensor. The building was, in theory, completely legible at all times. That was the promise of the system, total informational coverage of physical space. The patrols took about 40 minutes each. I'd leave the desk, walk the ground floor perimeter, east dock, south staging, west corridor, north receiving, then take the south stairwell up to the second floor, walk the length of it, check the emergency exits, tap my checkpoints, and come back down the north stairwell to the desk. During the overnight sort, the ground floor had maybe 15 associates working, most of them wearing yellow safety vests over hoodies, scanning packages, loading carts, operating the belt sorter. They ignored me. I ignored them. The only associate I spoke to regularly was a woman named Priya, who worked the inbound scan station closest to my desk and sometimes asked me to watch her water bottle while she went to the restroom. She was the only person in the building who consistently acknowledged that I was a human being rather than part of the infrastructure. For the first 3 weeks, the job was exactly what Dina had described. Structured, consistent. I developed a rhythm. Arrive at 10, relieve the evening guard, check the desk, review the outgoing DAR, start my own. First patrol at 11, second at midnight. Sort crew arrived around 12:30. Third patrol at 1, fourth at 2. Break at 2:30 in the upstairs break room, where I'd eat whatever I'd brought and drink a coffee from the Keurig, which only had the dark roast pods left by that point in the day. Fifth patrol at 3:30. Sort crew wrapped up around 4. Sixth patrol at 4:30. Morning drivers started arriving at 5. Badge production and access control from 5 to 6. Day shift guard arrived at 6. Handoff, drive home, sleep. I want to be precise about when the first thing happened, because I logged it, and because precision matters when you're trying to reconstruct the moment when something began to not make sense. It was October 29th, a Tuesday night, during my 1 a.m. patrol. I was on the second floor, walking the east corridor toward Checkpoint 9, which was mounted on the wall outside the LP office. The corridor was empty, lights on their overnight dim setting. Not off, just reduced, a yellowish wash that made everything look slightly jaundiced. I tapped Checkpoint 9 and my handheld beeped confirmation. Then I looked at the screen, which displayed the checkpoint name and timestamp, and below that a line I'd never noticed before, a floor designation. It read FL-3. I stopped walking. The checkpoint naming convention at BOS 5 was straightforward. Ground floor checkpoints were labeled G-1 through G-8. Second floor checkpoints were labeled 2-1 through 2-6. Checkpoint 9, which I was standing in front of, should have been 2-3. I'd tapped it dozens of times. It had always read 2-3. I tapped it again. The handheld beeped. The screen read, Checkpoint 2-3, Floor 2, timestamp 0107. Normal. Completely normal. I stood there for a few seconds, looking at the screen, then scrolled back to the previous entry. It read, Checkpoint 2-3, Floor 2, timestamp 0107. No FL3. No indication that it had ever said anything different. I wrote it in my DAR as a minor display glitch on the handheld. I noted the time and location. Then I finished the patrol and went back to the desk. When I checked the patrol log on the desktop system, where all checkpoint taps were recorded and time-stamped, every entry was normal. 14 checkpoints, correct labels, correct floors, correct sequence. I forgot about it for 6 days. On November 4th, I was at the security desk at around 2:15 in the morning, half watching the camera feeds while filling out a door alarm report. Someone on the sort crew had pushed the south emergency exit to take a smoke break without scanning out, which happened 3 or 4 times a week. The camera system was a grid, 8 rows of 8 feeds, each one a small square with a camera number and location label in the upper left corner. I knew the grid by heart. Cameras 1 through 20 on the ground floor, 21 through 40 on the second floor, 41 through 52 on the exterior, and 53 through 64 on the dock bays and parking areas. While I was typing, I glanced up at the grid and noticed that camera 37, which normally showed the second floor north corridor, a straight empty hallway with gray carpet and fluorescent light, was displaying something slightly different. The hallway looked longer. The carpet was the same gray, but the walls were a shade I couldn't quite identify. Not the standard off-white of the second floor, but something closer to a pale warm tone, like the interior of a cardboard box. And at the far end of the hallway, where there should have been a fire door with a green exit sign above it, there was instead another corridor branching to the left, leading somewhere that didn't correspond to any part of the building I knew. I leaned forward. The label on the feed said CAM-372F-N-CORR, which was correct. But the image wasn't the second floor north corridor. It was somewhere else. I clicked on camera 37 to enlarge it. The moment the feed expanded to fill the center monitor, it was the second floor north corridor again. Normal, empty hallway, gray carpet, fire door, green exit sign. I sat there looking at it for a long time, but nothing changed. I reduced it back to the grid. It remained normal. This time I didn't write it in my DAR. I didn't know what I would write. Camera briefly showed wrong image isn't a category in the reporting template. The template has fields for door alarms, access violations, safety hazards, medical incidents, property damage, and a general other field that I'd only ever used for things like found water bottle left on conveyor belt or exterior light out on south side. I couldn't describe what I'd seen in language that would make sense inside that field, so I left it out. What I did instead was start paying attention to camera 37. For the next 2 weeks, nothing happened. Camera 37 showed the second floor north corridor, exactly as it should, every time I looked. I began to doubt what I'd seen. Night shifts do something to your pattern recognition. You stare at static images for hours, and your brain starts generating variation where there is none, finding differences between identical frames because it's desperate for stimulation. I knew this. Every overnight guard knows this. You see movement in still feeds. You hear sounds in mechanical hum. It's fatigue, not phenomena. I told myself this, and I was satisfied with the explanation. On November 19th, the inventory management system flagged an anomaly. I need to explain how I had access to this. Security at BOS 5 didn't directly interact with the warehouse management system. That was operations territory, handled by the sort managers and the area managers during active shifts. But the security desk had a read-only view of certain system dashboards, primarily for loss prevention purposes. One of these was the inventory movement log, which showed real-time scan events. Every time a package was scanned at a station, the event was recorded with a timestamp, a station ID, an associate ID, and a location code. Location codes at BOS 5 followed a consistent format. Ground floor locations started with G, followed by a zone letter and a numerical position. Second floor locations started with 2. The dock bays were D. There was no third prefix because there was no third floor. At 2:47 a.m. on November 19th, a scan event appeared in the log with the location code 3-A-0117. I noticed it because I had been half monitoring the dashboard while doing paperwork, and the 3 was visually wrong. It broke the pattern. Every other entry on the screen started with G or 2 or D. This one started with 3. I looked at it. It had a timestamp, a station ID I didn't recognize, station FL3-RECV-04, and an associate ID that was blank. The package ID was a standard Amazon tracking number. The event type was listed as inbound scan. I refreshed the dashboard. The entry was gone. The log showed continuous scan events from the ground floor sort operation, all with normal location codes, all with valid associate IDs. No 3-A-0117, no FL3-RECV-04. I took a screenshot before I refreshed. I still have it, or I think I do. I saved it to a USB drive that I kept in my coat pocket, and the file is there. But when I opened it later at home, the image was just the dashboard with normal entries. No anomalous line. I don't know if the screenshot failed to capture what I saw, or if what I saw was never there in a way that could be captured. I started keeping a personal log, not in the DAR. The DAR went to Securitas and to the Amazon LP team, and I wasn't going to submit entries about things I couldn't verify. I used a small notebook, the kind you can buy at CVS for $2, and I kept it in my left cargo pocket. I wrote the date, the time, and a brief description of anything that didn't fit. November 19th, 2:47 a.m. Scan event with floor 3 location code appeared on inventory dashboard. Disappeared on refresh. Screenshot inconclusive. November 22nd, 1:33 a.m. During patrol. Overhead signage on second floor east corridor read FL3 East for approximately 2 seconds before I registered it consciously. When I looked directly, it read FL2 East, which is correct. November 24th, 3:10 a.m. Badge access log showed a door event for stairwell C. FL3 access at 3:08 a.m. I checked the badge access system. BOS 5 has 2 stairwells, south and north. There is no stairwell C. The event was logged to badge number 0000, which is not assigned to any associate. By 3:15, the entry had been replaced by a routine door alarm on the south emergency exit. November 28th, 12:50 a.m. Priya asked me if I'd ever been to the 3rd floor. I asked her what she meant. She said, "The 3rd floor, where they do the overnight receive." I told her BOS 5 only had 2 floors. She looked at me like I'd said something confusing, then shrugged and said, "Okay, never mind. Maybe I'm thinking of another building." She went back to her station. That was the entry that made me sit with the notebook open on my desk for 10 minutes without writing anything else, because Priya was not the kind of person who confused buildings. She'd worked at BOS 5 for over a year. She knew the layout. She knew her station. She knew where the bathrooms were. She knew the fastest route from inbound scan to the break room. She didn't confuse things. I wanted to ask her more about it, but she was wearing earbuds and scanning packages, and there was no natural way to reopen the conversation without making it seem like I was fixating on something, which I was. So I let it go, but I wrote it down. December was when the pattern started to consolidate. The floor. 3 references were no longer isolated. They appeared across multiple systems, never for long, never in a way that left a persistent record, but with increasing frequency and increasing consistency. The camera system would occasionally display a feed labeled CAM-7 13F-RECV, showing what looked like a receiving area, package carts, scan stations, conveyor segments that didn't match any space in the building. The image was always slightly off in color temperature, a few degrees warmer than the standard fluorescent palette of the real floors, and the geometry was wrong in ways I couldn't immediately articulate. Hallways that should have terminated in walls continued. Corners that should have been 90 degrees looked slightly obtuse. Nothing dramatic, nothing impossible by itself, just not BOS5. The inventory system would log 3 or 4 Floor 3 scan events per shift, always between 1 and 4 a.m., always with blank associate IDs, always at stations with the FL3 prefix. The package tracking numbers were real. I checked a few against the Amazon tracking portal, and they corresponded to actual shipments with valid delivery addresses. But the scan events that logged those packages on Floor 3 didn't appear in the official sort records. As far as operations was concerned, those packages had been sorted on the ground floor by the normal crew. The badge system generated Floor 3 door events almost nightly. Stairwell C, Floor 3 access, badge number 00000. Sometimes multiple events in sequence, as if someone, or something using a null badge, was moving through a series of access-controlled doors on a floor that the building did not contain. I told myself there were explanations. Software corruption, a legacy configuration from a previous tenant that had bled into the current system, a test environment that someone had accidentally merged with the production database. These were plausible explanations. They were the kind of explanations that an IT ticket would eventually resolve. But I didn't submit an IT ticket because the anomalies never persisted long enough to be documented through official channels. By the time I could have shown someone, the data was normal again. All I had was my notebook. On December 11th, I changed my patrol route. This wasn't authorized. The patrol route at BOS5 was fixed. 14 checkpoints in a specific sequence, generating a specific pattern in the patrol log that the LP team reviewed weekly for compliance. Deviating from the route would show up as a timing irregularity, but I needed to understand the building's physical layout in a way that my patrols hadn't required. I started with the stairwells. BOS5 had 2. The south stairwell between the ground floor dock area and the second floor offices, and the north stairwell between the ground floor receiving zone and the second floor staging overflow. Both were concrete. Both had 2 landings, ground and second floor, and both terminated at the second floor. There was no upward continuation. The ceilings above the second floor landings were flat, unfinished concrete, clearly the underside of the roof structure. I stood in each stairwell and looked up. There was nowhere else to go. I walked the entire second floor perimeter, looking for any door, hatch, or access point I might have missed. I found nothing. The second floor was exactly what it had always been. a rectangular space with offices on the east end, staging on the west end, the break room and training room in the center, and corridors connecting them. The ceiling was suspended acoustic tile over metal grid, standard commercial installation. I pushed up a tile in the east corridor and shined my flashlight into the plenum space above it. Ductwork, cable trays, the underside of the metal roof deck, no hidden floor, no concealed space. Nothing. I went back to the desk feeling foolish and a little relieved. The building was the building. 2 floors, a roof, and a parking lot. Whatever the system was displaying was a system problem, not a spatial one. On December 14th, Priya stopped me during my midnight patrol. She was standing near her scan station, not scanning, which was unusual. She normally worked continuously, earbuds in, focused, but she was just standing there, holding a package, looking at her scanner screen. "Hey," she said, "can you look at this?" I walked over. She held up the handheld scanner. On the screen was a scan confirmation for the package in her other hand. The location code read 3-A-0224. "It keeps putting me on floor 3, she said. "I scan the package and it logs it to a floor that doesn't exist. It's been doing this for a week. I told my manager and he said it's a software glitch and to just rescan until it gives me the right floor." Does rescanning fix it? Sometimes. Sometimes I have to scan it 3 or 4 times, and sometimes it accepts the floor 3 location and moves the package to the next stage anyway, like it's a valid location. She paused. I looked it up in the station directory. FL3-RECV-04 isn't listed, but the system doesn't reject it either. I didn't say anything for a moment. I was thinking about the fact that FL3-RECV-04 was the same station ID I'd seen in the inventory dashboard on November 19th. "Has anyone else reported this?" I asked. "I don't know. People don't really talk during sort. Everyone's on rate." She meant the productivity targets. Associates were tracked on scan speed, and talking slowed them down. But I've seen a couple of the new hires look confused at their scanners. Could be the same thing. I told her to keep rescanning until she got a valid floor code, which was the same thing her manager had told her, which was the only advice that made sense within the framework of the job. She nodded and went back to work. I went back to the desk and sat there watching the camera grid. I was looking at camera 37, which was showing the second floor north corridor, completely normal, and I was looking at the space between the feeds, the black borders separating each small square, and I was thinking about the building's camera count. 64 feeds, cameras 1 through 64. I had always accepted this number because it was the number displayed on the grid, but the feed I'd seen labeled CAM-71 didn't fit within that numbering. If the system only had 64 cameras, there was no camera 71, unless the system had cameras that the grid didn't normally display. I opened the camera management software, a program I had access to but rarely used, since the grid view was sufficient for monitoring. The software listed every camera in the system by number, location, and status. I scrolled through the list. Cameras 1 through 64, all active, all labeled with their correct BOS5 locations. Below camera 64, the list continued. Camera 65, 3F-S-C-ORR, status, active. Camera 66, 3F-N-CORR, status active. Camera 67, 3F-RECV-East. Status active. Camera 68, 3F-RECV-West. Status active. Camera 69, 3F- Staging-A. Status active. Camera 70, 3F- Staging-B. Status active. Camera 71, 3F-RE CV-Central. Status active. 7 cameras, all labeled Floor 3, all showing a status of active. My hand was shaking slightly when I clicked on camera 65. The feed loaded in the center monitor. It showed a corridor, not long, maybe 30 feet, with the same warm-toned walls I'd seen in the brief glitch on camera 37 weeks earlier. The floor was polished concrete, not carpet. The lighting was steady, slightly amber, and the corridor was empty. At the far end, a door with a small rectangular window. Through the window, I could see what looked like a staging area with package carts. I clicked on camera 67, a receiving area, scan stations with mounted monitors, a conveyor segment, stationary, yellow floor markings identical to the ones on the ground floor, package carts arranged in rows, no people. The space was clean, organized, and completely still. I went through all 7 feeds. Each one showed a different section of what appeared to be a fully equipped operational floor of a delivery station. Same infrastructure as the real floors. Same cart types, same station hardware, same signage style. But the color was wrong, the geometry was slightly wrong, and the space was empty. I took screenshots. I took 12 screenshots. I saved them to the USB drive. I checked them immediately by opening the drive. The files were there. The images showed exactly what I'd seen. Floor 3, empty but equipped, present within the system as 7 active camera feeds that no one had ever mentioned. I closed the camera management software and went back to the grid view. The grid showed 64 feeds. The Floor 3 cameras were not displayed. They existed in the software but not in the default monitoring view, as if they had been configured into the system and then excluded from the interface that anyone would normally look at. I did not include this in my DAR. I did not call Dina. I did not radio the LP office, which was empty. I sat at the desk for the rest of the shift, watching the normal feeds, writing normal entries, and waiting for 6 o'clock. When I got home, I opened the USB drive on my laptop. The screenshot files were there. I opened the first one. It showed the camera management software with cameras 1 through 64 listed. Below 64, the list ended. No cameras, 65 through 71. I opened all 12 files. They were all slightly different from each other. Different scroll positions, different selected cameras, but none of them showed the Floor 3 entries. The feeds I had seen, the corridor, the receiving area, the staging zones, none of it was in the images. I sat on my bed with the laptop open and felt something I want to describe accurately, because it wasn't fear. It was the feeling of reaching for a fact and finding it gone. Not contradicted, not disproven, just absent. As if the evidence had never committed to being evidence, as if it had allowed itself to be seen but not to be carried out of the building. I went back the next night. I opened the camera management software at 1:15 a.m. The list went to 64 and stopped. No Floor 3 cameras. I refreshed. I scrolled. I closed and reopened the program. 64 cameras. I checked every night for the rest of the week. The list never extended again. But the other anomalies continued. The badge system logged stairwell C events. The inventory system logged floor 3 scans. The camera grid occasionally flickered a feed to that warm-toned palette before snapping back. And my notebook filled up. Page after page of timestamps and descriptions that described a floor the building couldn't contain and the system couldn't consistently confirm. On December 23rd, I called Dina. I didn't describe the floor 3 anomalies. I asked a procedural question, whether BOS5 had ever been configured with more than 2 floors in any of its system platforms, and whether there was a known legacy data issue from the previous tenant. Dina said she didn't know anything about the system configuration. That was Amazon's domain, not Securitas's. She said if I had a technical concern, I should submit a ticket through the LP team's help desk portal. She asked if everything was okay. I said yes. She said, "The overnight can mess with your head. Make sure you're sleeping enough." I told her I was. I submitted a help desk ticket on December 24th. The subject line was, "Camera management software intermittently displays unrecognized camera IDs with floor 3 location codes." The ticket was assigned, acknowledged, and closed within 4 hours. The resolution note read, "Reviewed camera system configuration. All cameras operating within expected parameters. No floor 3 locations present in system. Recommend clearing browser cache and restarting monitoring software." I printed the ticket resolution and put it in my notebook. January came and the sort volume increased. Post-holiday returns. The overnight crew grew from 15 to 22. The conveyor belt ran continuously, and the building felt more populated, more alive. I expected the anomalies to decrease. More people, more activity, more attention on the systems meant more chances for someone else to notice and report. But the anomalies didn't decrease. They adjusted. The floor. 3 scan events now appeared with associate IDs, not blank anymore. Actual badge numbers, corresponding to real associates on the sort crew. I checked the first few against the badge production records. They were associates who were physically present on the ground floor during the times the floor 3 scans were logged. The system was recording them in 2 places simultaneously, sorting packages on the ground floor under their normal station codes and scanning packages on floor 3 under the FL3 prefix. Parallel activity. The same person, according to the data, working 2 locations on 2 floors at the same time. I watched the associates whose badge numbers appeared in the floor 3 logs. They were at their stations, scanning packages, moving carts, doing their jobs. They didn't look confused. They didn't look like people who were also somewhere else. They looked like people doing one thing in one place. I thought about telling Priya. She was the only person in the building I trusted to hear something strange without immediately deciding I was losing my mind. But when I approached her station on January 8th, she was scanning normally, and when I said her name, she looked up and smiled and said, "Hey, can you watch my water bottle? I need to run to the bathroom." And I said yes, and she went, and when she came back, I couldn't bring myself to say what I'd come to say, because what I'd come to say was, "The system thinks you were on the 3rd floor at 219 last night," and there was no version of that sentence that didn't sound like an accusation or a delusion. Instead, I started doing something I'm not sure I can fully justify. I started trusting the system. not believing it exactly. I didn't believe there was a third floor. I had walked the building. I had checked the stairwells, the ceilings, the plenum. The building was 2 floors and a roof. This was a physical fact I had verified, with my hands and my flashlight and the weight of my body on every surface I could reach. There was no third floor, but the system was consistent. The Floor 3 data behaved like real data. The scan events had proper formatting, valid tracking numbers, correct timestamps. The camera feeds, when they appeared, showed spaces that were internally consistent. The same corridor, the same receiving area, the same staging zones, arranged in a way that made operational sense if you imagined them as a functional floor. The badge events followed logical patterns. Entry, movement through sequential doors, exit. The data wasn't random noise. It was structured. It was coherent. It was doing exactly what real facility data does, just for a facility that didn't exist. And I began to notice that when I paid attention to the Floor 3 data, when I watched for it, logged it, tried to understand its patterns, the systems around me worked better. Not dramatically, not magically, just more smoothly. Fewer door alarms, fewer camera glitches on the real feeds, fewer badge errors during morning shift change. The building systems seemed to settle when I acknowledged the data they were producing, as if the act of observation, of taking the Floor 3 readings seriously as readings, regardless of what they represented, stabilized something in the overall architecture. This is the part that concerns me most, because I recognize what it sounds like. It sounds like a night shift guard developing a superstitious relationship with a software glitch. It sounds like pattern seeking elevated to magical thinking. I know this. I've turned it over in my head during every drive home, every attempt to sleep in the gray daylight of my apartment in Peabody while the neighbor's television murmured through the wall. I know what the rational assessment is, but the rational assessment doesn't account for what happened on January 15th. I was on my 2 a.m. patrol, 2nd floor, East Corridor, approaching Checkpoint 9. I tapped the NFC tag. The handheld beeped, the screen read. Checkpoint 3-1, Floor 3, timestamp 0204. I looked up from the screen. The corridor was the same corridor. Gray carpet, off-white walls, fluorescent lights on their dim setting. My checkpoint, my route, my building. But the handheld said Floor 3. I tapped it again. Checkpoint 3-1, Floor 3, timestamp 0204. Again. Checkpoint 3-1, Floor 3. I put the handheld in my pocket and walked to the end of the corridor. Fire door, green exit sign. I pushed through the door into the north stairwell. Concrete stairs going down to the ground floor. Concrete ceiling above. 2 floors, no third floor. I went back to the corridor and tapped the checkpoint again. Checkpoint 2-3, Floor 2, timestamp 0206. Normal, back to normal. I completed the patrol. All remaining checkpoints registered correctly. I went back to the desk and checked the patrol log on the desktop. Every entry was normal. 14 checkpoints, correct labels, correct floors. No record of the 3-1 readings. The handheld's local memory, when I scrolled back, showed 2-3 for every tap at that location. But something had shifted. Not in the building. In me. Because in the 2 minutes between the first tap and the last, between checkpoint 3-1 and checkpoint 2-3, The corridor had felt like a place I hadn't been before. Not visually. Visually, it was identical, but the quality of standing in it had changed. The air had a different weight. The fluorescent hum had a different pitch, barely perceptible, like a note played a quarter tone flat. And when I'd walked to the fire door and pushed through it and looked up the stairwell, for one instant before I processed what I was seeing, I had the impression of the stairwell continuing upward, more concrete, more landings, more doors, before the flat roof slab ceiling resolved into place, and I was back in BOS 5, in the building that had 2 floors, and always had. I didn't write this in the notebook. I sat at the desk and I did my job, and when Priya came by at 3:15 to say goodnight because her shift was ending early, I said goodnight and she said, "You look tired." And I said, "I'm always tired. It's 3 in the morning." And she laughed and left. After that, I stopped resisting the floor 3 data. I don't mean I started believing in a literal 3rd floor. I mean I stopped treating the anomalies as problems to be resolved and started treating them as information to be processed. When the inventory dashboard showed floor 3 scan events, I noted the package tracking numbers and watched to see if those packages moved through the ground floor sort normally. They did. When the badge system logged stairwell C events, I noted the times and correlated them with activity patterns on the real floors. When the camera management software, which began showing the floor 3 feeds again, intermittently, 2 or 3 times a week, displayed the warm-toned corridor or the empty receiving area, I watched the feeds with the same attention I gave the real ones, and the building ran well. The overnight shifts were smooth, alarms were minimal, the sort crew hit their rates, the morning transition happened cleanly. Dina called once in late January to say the BOS 5 LP team had flagged our site as having the lowest incident rate in the region for December and January. She said, "Whatever you're doing, keep doing it." I didn't tell her that what I was doing was monitoring a floor that didn't exist. February was quiet. The data was there, every night woven into the real data like a thread of a slightly different color in a fabric that was otherwise uniform. I could see it. I could trace it. I couldn't pull it out without pulling the rest apart. On February 20th, something happened that I haven't told anyone, and that I'm telling now only because I need to say it somewhere, even if it can't be verified. I was on my 1 a.m. patrol, 2nd floor, East Corridor. I approached checkpoint 9. I tapped the NFC tag. The handheld beeped. The screen read, "Checkpoint 3-1, floor 3. I didn't tap again. I put the handheld in my pocket. I stood still. The corridor was the same. Gray carpet, off-white walls, dim fluorescence. But I let myself feel it the way it felt. The slight difference in air weight, the quarter-tone shift in the hum, the sense of being in a space that was not quite the one my eyes reported. And then I walked forward, past the fire door, into the north stairwell. I looked up. The ceiling was there, flat and concrete, but the ceiling was higher than it should have been. Not dramatically, maybe 18 inches, as if the slab had been poured at a slightly greater height than I remembered, or as if the space between the 2nd floor landing and the roof had expanded just enough to suggest that there was room, barely, for something between them. I stood on the landing and looked up, and I had the thought, very calm, very clear, that if I came back tomorrow night and looked again, it would be higher still. And that if I kept looking, kept measuring the discrepancy, kept tracking the data and walking the patrols and monitoring the feeds, the space would continue to open. Not because the building was changing, because the system was building something, and the building was slowly, imperceptibly making room. I went back to the desk. I opened the camera management software. Cameras 1 through 64. Below 64, cameras 65 through 71, all active, all labeled Floor 3. I clicked on camera 65. The south corridor, warm-toned, empty, polished concrete floor, but not entirely empty. At the far end, near the door with the rectangular window, there was a cart. A standard yellow package cart, the same type used on the ground floor. And on the cart were packages. I could see the shipping labels. I enlarged the feed. The labels were readable. The addresses were in Salem, every one of them. Streets I recognized. Federal, Essex, Derby, Lafayette. Packages for people in Salem, sitting on a cart on a floor that the building didn't have. I watched the feed for an hour. Nothing moved. The packages sat on the cart. The corridor stayed empty. The lighting didn't change. It was the most stable, most persistent view of Floor 3 I had ever seen. And when my shift ended and the day guard arrived and I handed off the desk, the feeds were still there in the management software, and I didn't mention them. I drove home through Salem on the way back to Peabody. It was just after 6:30. First light, the streets quiet. I drove down Federal Street, past the old brick storefronts, past the Peabody Essex Museum, and I thought about the addresses on those labels. Someone on Federal Street was going to receive a package today. It would arrive in an Amazon van, scanned out of BOS 5, sorted on the ground floor by the overnight crew. That's what the official record would show. But somewhere in the data, in a layer of the system that I could see and that closed its own records behind me every time I left the building, that package had also been on a cart on a floor that didn't exist, in a corridor with the wrong color light, waiting. I'm still working at BOS 5. It's April now. The third floor data runs every night, consistent, structured, integrated with the real operations, in ways I can map but not explain. The camera feeds appear in the management software more often than not. The stairwell ceiling in the north landing is, I am fairly certain, 11 inches higher than it was in October, though I have no baseline measurement to prove this because I didn't think to measure it when I started. The sort crew works their shifts. Priya still asks me to watch her water bottle. The building functions. I do my patrols. I tap my checkpoints. Most nights they register on Floor 2. Some nights they register on Floor 3. I've stopped tapping a second time to correct them. The patrol log on the desktop always shows the normal readings, regardless of what the handheld displays, so there's no compliance issue, no discrepancy that anyone would review. The system resolves itself into consistency for everyone except me. And I think, I'm not certain, but I think, that this is what the job actually is. Not the patrols, not the badge production, not the door alarms. The job is to be the person who sees the data that the system produces about itself, but doesn't show to anyone else. To sit at the desk night after night and watch a building become slightly more than what it is on paper, and to let that happen, and to log it in a notebook that no one will ever ask to see. Dina called last week. She said the LP team wants to extend my contract through the end of the year. She said they specifically requested me by name, which is unusual. Securitas guards are generally interchangeable, and clients don't usually care who's on the overnight. But the BOS5 LP team asked for me. Dina sounded pleased. She said, "They trust you. That's hard to earn at Amazon." I said I'd stay. I don't know what floor 3 is. I don't know if it's a system artifact or a spatial fact that hasn't finished becoming physical. I don't know if I'm monitoring a malfunction or midwifing a structure into existence by virtue of being the only person who watches its data without flagging it for correction. I don't know if the packages on the cart with Salem addresses are the same packages that arrive at those houses through normal delivery, or if they're something else. Copies, echoes, preliminary versions that exist in the system before they exist on the street. What I know is that the building has 2 floors and a growing margin of ambiguity above the second one, and that the system has 3 floors and no ambiguity at all. And I know that every night for 8 hours, I sit at the intersection of those 2 facts, and I hold them both, and the building runs. And the last thing I'll say is this. 2 nights ago, during my 1 a.m. patrol, I tapped checkpoint 9 and the handheld read, checkpoint 3-1, floor 3, and I didn't put it back in my pocket. I kept it in my hand, and I kept walking. I walked through the fire door into the north stairwell, and I looked up. The ceiling was higher, not by inches anymore, by feet. And there was a door, a gray metal door with a badge reader set into the concrete wall of the landing, at a height that would have been absurd 6 months ago, but was now level with the landing if there were one more flight of stairs, which there was. Concrete steps going up, terminating at the door. I didn't go up. I stood on the second-floor landing, and I looked at the stairs that the building hadn't had in October. And I looked at the door, and I looked at the badge reader, and I felt in my coat pocket for my badge. And the badge reader had a small green light, pulsing slowly, the way they pulse when they're waiting for a tap, when they're active, when the system behind them is expecting someone specific. I went back to the desk. I finished my shift. I handed off to the day guard, a kid named Marcus, who has never once mentioned floor 3, and who I'm certain has never seen the extra cameras in the management software. I drove home through Salem, Federal Street, Essex Street, Derby Street. The packages will be delivered today. They always are. I just don't know from which floor.